Hey there, so we'll cover some tips for assumption questions in this video. Assumption questions could be very difficult for a couple different reasons. One main reason is it's a little bit hard to know what exactly they're asking. Other question types like conclusion or strength and weakening questions are more straightforward, although those could be difficult. Assumption questions are difficult in the sense that it's hard to know exactly what they're asking. And in addition, they come in two different flavors, and those two different flavors are sufficient assumption questions and necessary assumption questions. And that is where we'll start. We'll see how we can detect whether an assumption question is sufficient or necessary. So if you look on the screen, we have some examples of question stands for sufficient assumptions and necessary assumptions. If you like, you could pause the video and read them over very quickly. But to put it succinctly, sufficient assumption questions use weaker language, such as properly drawn and follows logically. On the other hand, necessary, like its namesake, is the opposite. It uses very strong language, such as required and depends. So, how I differentiate between the two is very simple. I first look for strong language. So, if I see anything like required, depends, or necessarily, and the word assumption, then it's necessary assumption. If I don't see those words, then quite simply, it's a sufficient. And that's all you have to do. So, we cover that. The next question is, when you're dealing with sufficient or necessary, what's the next step? So for sufficient, we're looking for something that makes the conclusion work. There's something missing. So you have the premise or premises and a conclusion, but the conclusion doesn't logically follow from the premises because they're assuming something. It's not actually stated. So pretty much you have to find the missing piece, connect it together, make sure everything makes sense, and then the conclusion makes sense as well. This might be a little bit abstract, but no worries, we'll cover examples soon. Also, it should be stated that there could be multiple different sufficient assumptions that make the argument work. There's not one, but they're just looking for one in the case of the problem that you're solving. Next up, we have the necessary assumption questions. And for these, we're just looking for assumption that has to be true. If this assumption is not true, the whole argument will fall apart. So something, once again, has to be true no matter what. And if any of the answers are not necessarily true, there's something that could be false, then those would be wrong. The correct answer, once again, has to be true. So let's look at example. So we have a very simple example, and it would be nice if the LSAT had examples like this on it. Unfortunately, their questions are a lot more difficult. So we have a premise, vitamin C is healthy, and the conclusion. Thus eat the Omega Nutra bar in your cabinet. And hopefully it's clear that there's something missing in this argument, which we'll find out. So a couple assumptions. So first we'll look at the sufficient assumption. So maybe you notice this, but there's a bit of a disconnect. Because in the premise, we're talking about vitamin C, and in the conclusion, they never mention vitamin C. Instead, they mention Omega Nutra bar. Thus, the conclusion doesn't logically follow from the premise. We have to bridge the gap. And one easy assumption would be Omega Nutra bars have vitamin C. That's the most obvious one. Another possible contender would be maybe Omega Nutra bars make you want to drink orange juice, and orange juice has vitamin C. Now that's a little bit goofy or ridiculous, but nevertheless, it still connects vitamin C with Omega Nutra bar. And one last one was maybe Omega Nutra bars allow you to generate your own vitamin C in your own body some way. You just produce it naturally, which also sounds a bit weird, but potentially it could happen. So the most obvious one is Omega Nutra bars actually have vitamin C, but it's good to remember that this is sufficient and not necessary because there's more than one answer. At the end of the day, there's looking for one of those, but there's different ways in which you could connect these two terms together. So that's the sufficient assumption. Next, we'll look for the necessary assumptions for this problem. So let us review the conclusion. Thus eat the Omega Nutra bar in your cabinet. So one necessary assumption is that you actually have the bar in your cabinet. Because if you don't, then how can you ever eat it? Might sound a little bit stupid, but regardless, it's something that has to be true. The second thing is that they're implying that vitamin C is healthy and that you should do healthy things. But for all we know, maybe it's better to be unhealthy, which also sounds stupid, but they're assuming that you should be healthy and you should do activities that lead to being healthy. So those are necessary assumptions for this problem. And that's it. So this is a short video. We just cover some core concepts regarding LSAT assumption questions. And in future videos, we'll cover some new ideas. So stay tuned.